Yo, how's it going, guys? Today we're going to be going over some Yu-Gi-Oh terminology for those of you that are a bit newer. In my next video, I'll be going over how to pendulum summon and some of the ins and outs of that. So if you're interested in that as well, be sure to stick around. So starting off here, we have advantage. It's going to be just card advantage in general or hand advantage, anything basically. This just means how many more cards you have than your opponent. And if you're talking about hand advantage, it's how many more cards you have in your hand. If it's just general or field advantage, it's how many more cards you have on the field. You can influence this by either getting rid of some of their cards or by adding some more of your own. Next up is book. Booking a monster refers to Book of Moon. It just means to flip a monster face down. Other cards also do this, like Book of Eclipse, or right now the destructive Daruma Karma Cannon is pretty popular. This also books all the monsters on the field. Bouncing means to move a monster from the field back to the hand. Be something like compulsory evacuation device is the most standard example. But some more modern cards like Big Welcome Labyrinth also do this. You can bounce your own cards or your opponent's. Spinning means shuffling a monster back into the deck. Something like Nightmare Unicorn or the X Pearly Noir do this. A brick, very common term. These are cards you don't want to see in your hand since they don't do anything in your hand and you don't need them in your hand to do your combos since you just search for them as part of your combo anyway. So really notorious example is the Brick Eyes White Dragon. Another name for bricks is actually Takatomborg, because this is one of the classic examples. You would search this off of the Speedroid Terratop, making Terratop a one-card combo, but if you draw it, you can still do the combo as long as you have the Terratop as well. The problem is you're basically going minus in card advantage because this would be a free plus you would get. It's a free card you would get, but now it's costing one of your start hand cards, if that makes sense. What's worse than drawing a brick is drawing a Garnet. This is named after Gem Knight Garnet. It was played in the Brilliant Fusion engine, and this card lets you fuse from your deck, like Branded Fusion or Fusion Destiny, but it lets you fuse only from your deck, not from your hand. So if you draw the Garnet, Brilliant Fusion doesn't work anymore. So you'd either have to run two of these, meaning you would see it more often, which sucks because you still don't want to see the card in your hand because it doesn't do anything, or you run the risk of your Brilliant Fusion just not working, which is a large power card in your deck. A more modern example of this would be the Mecha Phantom Beast O-line in the Auroradon package, since Auroradon needs to summon this from the deck exclusively as well. Going through more or less alphabetically, we'll get to Burn next. Most of you already know this. This is just inflicting effect damage. All the cards that do this, well, at least the older ones, all have like fire on them and they just burn your life points away. Chain blocking is slightly more technical. You respond to effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! By chaining cards to one another. In Magic, it's called putting them on the stack, I think. Basically, if we use the Sword Soul Grandmaster Chizhao as an example, let's say we just synchro summon this, then we can add to our hand a Sword Soul card from our deck, and now our opponent could chain the Ash Blossom to negate the effect. Now, chain blocking comes into play when you activate multiple effects at the same time. So in this case, we would activate the Chizhao, and then our opponent can respond since that's the only thing we're activating. But if we make the Chizhao using the Moye, we are activating Moye's draw effect and Chizhao's search effect at the same time, and we get to select the order that we create the chain in. We get to, in Magic terms, select the order we put the cards in the stack or something, I guess. Basically, if you activate the Chi first and then the Moye second, your opponent can only activate the Ash Blossom to negate the Moye, but not the Chi. Of course, something like Infinite Impermanence doesn't care about this since it just targets the card on the field, but Ash Blossom responds to the last thing in the chain. So chain blocking lets you build your chains in such a way that you can dodge negation effects. Sad Ash Blossom. Other decks that do this a lot are Prank Kids. Prank Kids can utilize chain blocking to play around pretty much any hand trap there is. You can play around Ghost Spell, Ash Blossom. You have lines that play around other stuff too, but that's not really chain blocking anymore. Cheating out cards. I have a beautiful picture of Cyberstein with the old print on it from 1903, I guess, because there's only like 5 pixels in this picture. But cheating out a card means to special summon it without using its normal correct summoning method, right? Like Cyberstein could get you a fusion monster without fusion summoning. Instead, you just pay life points to special summon it. Something more modern would be the Great Mikanko Ceremony, which lets you special summon Ohime without actually ritual summoning it. An important ruling consideration here is if the cheated out monsters go to the graveyard, you cannot revive them since they were not properly summoned. Dumping or foolishing a card refers to Foolish Burial or Foolish Burial Good, which selects a card from your deck, a specific one, and sends it to the graveyard. This is slightly different from milling a card, which just means to send cards from the top of your deck or your opponent's deck to the graveyard. Some cards can even do both of these effects. Fizzling, so the forbidden word in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. As an example, we'll take Pot of Greed, and if we negate this with Solemn Judgment, we'd be negating the activation, which isn't fizzling. If we negate it with Ash Blossom, we would negate the effect. So technically Pot of Greed resolves without effect as well, but that's not really what you'd understand under fizzling. It's more of if you have a continuous card, like a continuous spell or a field spell, something along those lines, and if you chain Mystical Space Typhoon to it to destroy them and remove them from the field. And these cards need to stay on the field in order to resolve with an effect. So you're not negating the card per se, so you wouldn't really say you negated the effect, but they do resolve without having an actual effect. That's what fizzling means. Another way of fizzling cards is by dodging effects. Say we have Sword Soul of Moye again, and we activate its effect to summon the token, and now our opponent chains Infinite Impermanence to negate our effect. If we use the Heavenly Dragon Circle, we get to tribute one Worm monster, so we tribute our Moye away, and it's no longer on the field at this point, which means Infinite Impermanence does not have a target, so it can't actually negate anything. And this way we dodge the effect of the Infinite Impermanence, causing it to fizzle, and we still get to summon out our token off of the Moye and extend our plays. Floating cards are just any cards that replace themselves, be it when they're destroyed by battle, or just if they leave the field at all. You can float into summoning a monster back onto the field like Mystic Tomato, or Sanga just floats by adding a monster from your deck to your hand. Floodgates are something most of you are familiar with probably. It's not mutually exclusive with the stun. You can have just any continuous effects that stop your opponent from playing the game. This can even be monsters as well, like a Baguska in defense position. And stun decks try to just go all in on this and beat you up slowly. But you can have select floodgates on, well, normal is maybe not the right word, but on end boards of decks that don't just try to stall out the game. Generic can either refer to generic mat or generic material, which is just extra deck monsters that don't require a specific typing or attribute or a name. So Baguska just requires any 2 level 4 monsters. Appaloosa requires just monsters with different names. Baron just needs a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. So this is different from cards that require a certain typing. Like most of the Cyberse Link monsters require Cyberse materials, so those wouldn't be generic. What else could be generic is a staple, just cards that you can put into any deck, and this could be really, you put them into any deck, like Triple Tactics Talent, or you put them into a vast majority of the decks, or just a lot of the decks out there. Like Reinforcement of the Army obviously only helps if you're actually playing warriors, but any warrior deck can run this, so it's a staple for warrior decks. Right now in the TCG and OCG, SP Little Knight is a staple. You basically have to run this, and in Master Duel it's this lineup, otherwise you're kind of griefing. They're called staples because you can take your deck list and then you take any of the staple cards, you just tack them on top. You just staple them right onto the deck list. They go anywhere, it doesn't matter. You take the same set of cards, you just staple them right on top of your deck. Hand traps are any cards that you can activate from your hand, even during your opponent's turn. This includes, but is not limited to, actual trap cards like Infinite Impermanence that can be used from the hand, but usually just refers to the monster lineup, since those are a lot more common. You can use any of these from your hand, even during your opponent's turn, and interact with them that way. Hand ripping refers to taking cards out of your opponent's hand. You just take one and you rip it out. You don't always have to reveal the hand, like on these 2 cards. Some of them, like Mulan Glacia, just rip random cards out. Hand looping is the more extreme variant of this. There's some combos you can do, like with Trickstar Reincarnation and Droll and Lockbird, to completely rip all the cards out of your opponent's hand, thereby hand looping them. Mulligans are from, I don't know, like golf or tennis, I think. You also use this term in Magic. It's basically just a second try is what it means. In Magic, I think you can show your opponent that your hand is trash and then just draw a new starting hand. That's unfortunately not a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! But what it means here is cards that let you draw a card and then shuffle one back, or draw a card and banish one from your hand, just to cycle through and change up the cards in your hand for another try at having something that you actually want to have. Negates, or omni-negates, are just cards that negate other cards, be it the activation or the effect. Doesn't really matter. Omni-negate just means it can negate any type of card, be it a spell, a trap, or a monster card. Another term you might hear, especially when talking about Floodgates, is on legs. This refers to something like Destiny Hero Plasma being skill drain on legs. It's the same thing, but it's a monster and can walk around or have a body or something, so it's just called that on legs. Other things you might see are Colossus is Mistake on legs, or right now unfortunately it's Arise Heart is Macrocosmos on legs, just with a body. To get into this means once per turn or hard once per turn. They're all slightly different things. First, this card does not have an actual once per turn written anywhere on it. If you read the effect on the top, the pendulum scale effect, it will say if you have an Ignite card in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy both of them and add a Fire Warrior from your deck or graveyard to your hand. And you can do this as much as you want, since to actually resolve successfully, it's implied that you need to be destroyed and then you're no longer on the field, so you can't use your effect again. There's also once per turn or soft once per turn, where the card just says once per turn on it, and this means it's once per turn per copy. If I summon 2 Lone Fire Blossoms, I can use each of their effects once per turn. Interesting rulings with this are that if I have this copy and I flip it face down and face up again, or if it leaves the field and I revive it again, it technically counts as a different copy of the card, so I can use the once per turn effect again. Hard once per turn, the card will say you can only use the effect of name of the card once per turn, or you can only activate one name of the card per turn. There's a slight difference here. Something like Pot of Desires says you can only activate it once per turn, so if you negate the activation, like with Solemn Judgment, the card was never activated. Since you negated the activation, it was never activated in the first place, so if you have a second copy, you can activate it again, because this is technically the first time it's activated. If you negate the effect, like with an Ash Blossom chained to the Pot of Desires, you have activated it and it resolved without effect. You can't use the second copy. Cards that say you can only use this effect, like the Ash Blossom itself, you can only attempt to use them once per turn. Doesn't matter if it got its activation or its effect negated. Penned can refer to the beautiful pendulum monsters themselves that come in all different shapes and sizes and flavors of the extra deck. And yes, I did look for the ones with the most text on them. Or it can refer to penned summoning or pendulum summoning them out. I'll get to that in a different video since it is a slightly more complex mechanic. Piercing, or trample as it's known in Magic, used to have a really convoluted way of spelling it out, which was during battle between this attacking card and a defense position monster whose defense is lower than the attack of this card, inflict the difference as battle damage to your opponent. Luckily, it was just changed to this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. But I think you get the gist of what this does. It's you still inflict damage to your opponent through their defense position monsters. And there's a multitude of different cards that do this. Pentastag even lets you give this effect to your other monsters. Removal just refers to removing cards from the field. This can be something like Raigeki, which removes them by destroying them. Spot removal means you're removing specific cards from the field, like Baron's effect to destroy one card on the field. This is also known as a pop. So a pop is a targeted destruction or spot removal that destroys. Something like Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer also counts as spot removal since you are popping one card even though it doesn't actually target. And of course, there's also different forms of spot removal that don't destroy. So Nightmare Unicorn will target one card on the field and it will shuffle it back into the deck. Stack, different than in Magic, just means you look at and select the top cards of the deck. Either something like Spiral Gear Drone that looks at the top cards of your opponent's deck and rearranges them, or Oracle of Zephyra, which searches out one monster from your deck and places it on top. Rhoda is an acronym for Reinforcement of the Army, which adds a level 4 or lower warrior type monster from your deck to your hand. And this refers to any generic search spell. So Signet Mining, you get to discard a card and then you'll just search for a level 4 or lower Cyrus monster. And there's a bunch of these in lots of different flavors and varieties. Slightly different is Stratos, named after elemental hero Stratos, which when it's summoned gets to search for anything from its archetype. So Stratos on summon searches for elemental heroes, and this refers to any kind of card that does the same thing. So the Ochichi Ad Ignister on summon will search for any Ad Ignister monster from its deck, from its archetype. And Tutor is just any card that adds from your deck to your hand, no matter how it gets there. I hope this helped out with some terminology, since I do use it pretty casually in my videos. If you have any questions to any of the terminology, I'll pin a comment down below if anybody has questions about it, or if I remember some that I might have passed up on here. And yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something.